Failure simply is
Practice.
life teaching you or showing you this is something you need to work on.
Welcome to Spiritually Hungry. Today we're going to talk about failure. I know it's something we all avoid, but hopefully by the end of this episode, it will be something you welcome.
Embrace.
After all, our failures set us up for future success, and failure is an integral part of learning if you use it. But in today's society, where it seems like we only hear about success, we're not really privy to all the many times that those that we see succeeding, we don't see the failures that preceded that. So we avoid failures.
But by the way, right, clearly,
Anybody successful has failed multiple times. It's just they handled it in a different way. And I'm going to give you so many examples today. So after you walk away from this episode, you will no more be able to lie to yourself. So failure often makes us feel shameful, and it couldn't be less than true. So, Michael, you've heard the old adage, if something's worth doing, it's worth doing well, right? What do you think about that?
Well, in general, it's definitely true. If you're going to do anything you set out to do, you want to set out to do it in the best way possible.
Well, yes, but I'd like to disagree.
Do you really?
Anything worth doing is worth doing badly, poorly, and inexpertly. Comprende?
If you have to, I guess.
Because if it's worth doing with effort and commitment. And everything worth doing is worth doing badly. That's first. To get to a place where ultimately you will succeed. So we often skip the messy part of growth. And we have this with one of our kids. I mean, he really, really doesn't enjoy process. And so every time he's disappointed by an outcome, it's like the sky is falling. And I'm always like, you have to learn this word and learn to love it and expect it and appreciate it and enjoy it. And that is process. Because that's the making of anybody. I think often we imagine the glory, right? The glory of a full house at the Met, if that's something you want, or walking on a stage to accept an award, or signing autographs outside, or whatever it is. But we imagine just that state.
No, that sounds very interesting.
Not to you, but to some. But we don't fantasize about the times we fall short or we mess up, obviously. The problem is our vision of us succeeding seems to be where we kind of spend a lot of our time. And it's a roadmap to our purpose, but it's only that. It's not the outcome. So to our listeners, what was something that sparked your joy that you dismissed because you decided you weren't good at it? I mean, think about how many things each one of us could have been.
Pursue.
Mm-hmm, could have been good at.
Is it something you can think of?
Yeah. But I've gone back and done it. Like I if there's something I had regret about not having done or seen through, I'm actively doing it now. I remember hearing an interview that Ed Sheeran gave, and he was on the Howard Stern show, and Howard Stern's like, wow, your voice, it's amazing. You've obviously always been this talented. And he's like, no, in fact, when I go and I meet with like young kids and they're saying they want to be a singer or songwriter, why are you looking at me like that?
No, I remember the story.
I just love it. It's so inspiring. Yeah. They're like, oh, I could never sing like you because your voice is beautiful. And he literally plays recordings from when he was 16 or 17. And honestly, like, wow, it doesn't sound too good. And you're shocked. First of all, I love his humility and his desire to believe in other people and help them believe that they can be great as well. But that took practice. Like, if he just gave up and he was only a songwriter but didn't think he could ever train his voice, then he wouldn't be who he is today. So no matter what your I can't is, I'm willing to bet it's something you've only tried a handful of times, but then at some point abandoned that, which is, kind of scary.
I think that for me, my view on failure is based on what I think life's purpose is. And we talk about this a lot, but I think it's worth mentioning again that the spiritual view of life is that we are born a certain person with traits, both good and bad, positive and negative. And we're meant to be in a constant process of change, a constant process of transformation. And with the understanding that I ultimately can never really be happy. can never be at peace unless I am actively transforming, changing. And I know for many people, it's not, I mean, again, I don't know if we took a poll, I wonder how many people really see that, because people want to succeed, of course. If I'm not good at basketball and I want to become a great basketball, I want to become an expert in a certain area or a certain skill. But not many of us are thinking about the importance of change for change's sake, which means, again, of course, become a better person. All the transformation leads us to become a better person. But it's not just about getting, from lack of success to success, from lack of skill to skill. It's a worldview. It's a life view that I know that whoever I am today, in order for me to be happy next year and in 5 years from now, I better be changing for the better all the time.
Well, I think unfortunately people can just consider the idea of change and growth, especially at a rapid pace, only in your youth, right? And then we falsely think that we're meant to arrive. That's the first lie. And that the change, if any at all, usually is forced or it's circumstantial and it's slower. It's not meant to be that quick. And all of those are lies, right? So I think the first thing is to change what your view is in terms of your evolution and what that's meant to look like.
And I would ask our listeners right now to be honest with yourself and ask, is changing really for the better in all aspects? Is that a real constant desire that you have? Because I think a lot of people, if there's a problem, a person's having a problem in their relationship, they want to change the dynamic, or they might even want to change themselves in order for the relationship to work. It's more, again, change for a goal rather than change as a way of life, is what I'm saying. So if and when that becomes your reason for being, which I strongly believe it has to be in order for an individual to really throughout life be satisfied, happy, then you realize that failure is one of the most important aspects, because failure simply is
practice.
Life teaching you or showing you this is something you need to work on. So I think this is where it starts. And again, I do think that unfortunately, not enough of us are focused in this way. So first, desire change for your own sake. Again, not for success, not certainly for the way others will view you, but your soul needs to be transforming all the time. And then, of course, therefore, failure and mistakes are going to be a necessary part of, if you'd never made a mistake, even if you didn't hurt somebody else, for example, then how do you know that you have to learn to be more conscious of others? If you never yelled at somebody and really felt regret about it, how are you going to learn that part of your transformation has to be to diminish your anger and so on and so forth? So there's actually an ancient teaching that says one can never accomplish without failure. One only achieves with failure. And specifically that one achieves where they have failed. So it's not, if you ask most people, would you like to go through life without any failure? The answer would be yes. But that would be a big mistake. Would you like to go through life without any mistakes? Many of us would say, of course. But when you understand that the mistake, that the purpose of the mistake is in order to shine a light on those areas that you need to change, and only again predicated on the fact that you really see your life's purpose as changing for the better all the time, then not only do you embrace mistakes and failures, you actually realize they are the most important part of life.
Unfortunately, the examples you gave about, if you never yelled at somebody, then you wouldn't realize that you needed to change the way you express yourself. But I think very often when we make mistakes, we look to see who we can blame and where the fault lies, because we don't want to take responsibility, because we equate failure very often with not being capable or intelligent enough or able, really, right? So I think we have to really, there's so much that we have to change.
It's biblical. I was going to say it's the first in the biblical story, the first mistake ever made was Adam and Eve eating from the tree of knowledge, good and evil. Those of you who know the story. But the interesting part is that the first thing that happened when in this biblical story, God asks Adam, "Why did you eat from the tree?" He blames Eve. And
of course he does.
And the Kabbalists explained that his failure was not that he did or did not eat from the tree. It was that he blamed Eve for his mistake. And like you said, I think it's a very important point that when we look to blame, all that is our ego saying, don't change. It's his or her fault.
Exactly that. Because even if you look at the word failure, you can't consider failure without considering fear, right? So right away, it's like, oh, if people see that I made the mistake, I'll be found out, or they'll see I'm not smart enough, or they might laugh at me, or I'll look stupid. It's all, and what are all those examples? Or they'll think I'm dumb. It's ego at work, right? And that's where we get into trouble. And that's how we get stuck. We fail and then we get stuck there because it's that narrative that is circling around our heads instead of seeing what it's for. This is just practice. This is action and motion, and you're meant to fall and fail and make mistakes until you excel.
And that's a very important point. And I'd like to ask our listeners to really think about either a situation or an aspect of their lives where they are blaming somebody else, either for
your circumstance, your lack of
anger,
income,
resentment,
whatever. And once you live like that, everything falls under that category.
And think about and reflect upon where maybe it's not them. Maybe there is actually something about you that needs to change. Maybe there is something about your life that you want to change. Because like you said, the ego which is very smart. What it does is, because the purpose of the ego is to make sure we don't change, to make sure that we stay who we are. One of the best ways to do that when things don't go right, oh, it's not me, right? It's him or her, it's them, it's circumstance.
Well, what you were saying, Rav Ashlag, the great Kabbalist, teaches that we can't rise without falling first, right? We can't complete our work. We can't elevate to the highest levels without first going down and then going up. So to me, falling is synonymous with failing. So there has to be that dip for you to go back up again. Again, if not, how do you learn? Now, before we really go deeper into the spiritual understanding, I want to talk about this idea of failure and what we think is a failure. Was it really that? So I want to give some examples. Have you ever heard of General Motors model EV-1?
Nope.
Right. So you've heard of General Motors, but not EV-1. It was the first mass-produced all-electric car. It came out in, any idea?
2012?
1996.
Oh, really? Oh, I was really wrong about that one. What a big mistake I just made.
You did. I mean, honestly, I'm not impressed.
1996. And that's before we got married.
And General Motors decided that there wasn't enough demand, and it was discontinued in 1999. 16 years later, in 2012, Tesla released their all-electric Model S with great success. What if General Motors had stuck with it? I think it's a perfect example of how quick we are to accept failure. I know. Maybe it was just before its time. That is possible.
Yeah, I know.
But what if they tried again in 2000 or 2005 or 2012? My point is, it wasn't them that came back with it. Sometimes the goal we set out to meet is a failure, but what if we stumbled across something that's really profound and it's just not the right time? Again, my point is, if you don't abandon your idea or your beliefs and you try again, it might come to be. So the year was 1968, and Spencer Silver, a researcher at 3M, was attempting to create an extremely strong adhesive, but instead made the exact opposite. I think it's a really interesting story. This very weak glue was easily peeled off without damaging the object it was adhered to. His glue was deemed a failure. It didn't fit the purpose it was designed for, but Silver never let go of the dream that his creation would one day serve a purpose. He just couldn't figure out how to use it. 6 years passed. In 1974, Art Fry, a co-worker at 3M, had an epiphany. Fry sang in his church choir and would mark passages in his hymn book with bookmarks, which would eventually all fall out. If only there was an adhesive that could stick to the pages, but with a bond weak enough so that the adhesive could be removed without harming the paper. The Post-it note was born.
That's interesting.
So it's just, that's what I love about reading about people's lives and their stories and history, because it's so informative. How many times have we had a good idea and we just abandoned it because it didn't fit the criteria in which we had intended it to? So then we think that it's not worthwhile at all. And I want to just give you a few more examples because I love studying people. This was in Entrepreneur Magazine. So these 4 entrepreneurs ended up having massive success, but they were all rooted in failure at first. And this is the perfect example of why you should never stop as soon as you meet failure. So Ariana Huffington, we all know who she is. She got rejected by 36 publishers. And it's hard to believe because it's one of the most recognizable names in the online publications. But her second book, which she tried to publish long before she created the Huffington Post empire, was rejected 36 times. George Steinbrenner bankrupted a team. So before he made
Is that true?
Yeah.
Which team?
So before he named him, he made a name for himself when he acquired ownership of the New York Yankees. For those of you who are not Yankees fans, he owned a small basketball team called the Cleveland Pipers back in 1960. By 1962, as a result of Steinbrenner's direction, the entire franchise went bankrupt. That stretch of failure followed him when he took over the Yankees in the 1970s, and the team struggled. With a number of setbacks and losses through the 1980s and 90s, he had major public criticism, and he made controversial decisions. And then those who follow the Yankees, he led them to an amazing comeback, 6 World Series between 1986 and 2003. Walt Disney, he was told he lacked creativity. No, he's one of the most creative geniuses of the 20th century, but he was fired from a newspaper because he was told he lacked creativity. And then he had a bunch of flops. The list goes on. This was interesting too. Milton Hershey started 3 candy companies before Hershey's, and they all failed. So we know him for his chocolate. He first started his candy production career when he was nobody. After being fired from an apprenticeship with a printer, Hershey started 3 separate candy-related ventures and was forced to watch all of them fail. Can you imagine? And then he founded Lancaster Caramel Company, and he started seeing results, and then we know the history. But like, we can just draw on those examples. I mean, there were so many more, but I just picked the top, 4 or whatever. How many times have we abandoned things that
it actually might be? So there's a really interesting book called The Right Kind of Wrong by Amy Edmondson. She's a professor at Harvard Business School.
Harvard Business School, because I'm quoting her too.
Oh, nice.
There's 3 types of failures she identifies.
Well, but yes, but actually what I found interesting as well.
Good correction, Michael. He was going to say more interesting.
Well, if you say so. That when she started her career, her first research, when she was a PhD, when she was going for a PhD, she was in charge of the study, which is an interesting study, to research whether good teams in hospitals make less mistakes than bad teams. So study different teams in different hospitals, those that had a good team ethos and those that were not really working well as a team. Her thesis was that those who were stronger and better team made less mistakes as opposed to those who were not working well as a team. So she does all the research, it's not an insignificant amount of money. And she tells the story that she got the research back. And what do you think it showed?
Well, I would have thought the team that was working well together would have better results.
Right. They would make less mistakes, right? So the results came back.
No.
And
ego? What was it?
Well, no. So her thesis was, as we said, was that better teamwork will lead to less mistakes by those teams in those hospitals. And they found the opposite. That there were more mistakes reported from the teams that have great teamwork in the hospitals, as opposed to less mistakes reported by the teams that had worse teamwork in the hospitals. And so at that point, she was upset. She saw it as a failure, because the thesis, it's clearly the data was showing the opposite of her thesis. Then she had an interesting brainstorm, and she thought maybe it's not that the teams that don't have good teamwork have less mistakes. It's just that they report the mistakes less.
I was going to say that because...
So she did a little bit further research. She did a little bit of further research, and it came to be true that it wasn't that the team that had better teamwork have more mistakes. It's just that they
were so
they were more they were more readily reporting them, because the teamwork, and she comes up with this idea of a psychologically safe environment, where they knew that if they report their mistakes, they're not going to be crucified. Whereas
they could learn from it and work
exactly.
Together.
So which I think is interesting on many levels, right? That there actually were probably more mistakes in the teams that had poor teamwork, but because the ethos was so bad, nobody wanted to admit to the mistakes or and therefore report the mistakes. As opposed to, again, where there was real teamwork and there was real camaraderie, they were more apt and open to report mistakes. So she realized from there that, and the problem again is that when you don't admit your mistake, even to yourself, you're bound to repeat it. You're not going to grow from it. You're not going to learn from it. So she develops this whole idea of a psychologically safe space, which I think for me, because what we're talking about here is the life as change all the time. You have to be safe with yourself. Most of us don't want to learn from our mistakes because we're scared to admit even to ourselves that we've made a mistake.
Well, if you don't have a healthy relationship with yourself, you'll criticize yourself beyond, and you'll feel shame, and you'll feel an array of negative emotions. So it's easier to say, to seek perfection, because then you can't be attacked.
Exactly. But what we're
not
seeing
by
is
yourself or others. And obviously that's not true.
Well, it's the opposite of true. And I think one element which I add to that is that if you envision the blessings you want in life, whatever it is, love, success, and the understanding that those blessings are waiting for you, but the version that you are now is not ready to receive them. You have to become a more improved, a different version of yourself in order to be able to access and manifest those blessings. Again, hopefully that thought gives the drive not only to want to change, but also to embrace our failures by saying, I'm so happy. But again, this is internal, right? You have to be safe with yourself to say, I'm so happy that I realized I'm doing this wrong, or I did that wrong, or I had this failure, because then it gives you a roadmap to become the person that can receive the blessings that you're meant to have.
Well, it's kind of like if you want to write a book. I mean, I know I had this process and I thought I should have written a book by a certain age and this, that, and I saw it as some kind of a failure that I hadn't achieved that yet. Then when I finally did write a book, I realized, wow, I couldn't have written it 10 years earlier because I didn't have the wisdom that I had when I actually wrote it. And then once I wrote a few books, I was like, oh, is that the best of me? Will I be able to write better books? And then
David Sedaris has a book called The Best of Me.
Really?
It's a collection of his best writings.
And then if you continue growing, changing, transforming, you gain more experience, more knowledge. And then of course your writing would become better. And it doesn't have to be about writing. I'm just using that example, but it could be about anything. That's the point. I think unfortunately people have these false narratives that they convince themselves that this is as good as they can get, or if they didn't get there, it means they should try something else, that it should be easy. And I think that's the other lie. Like
Also
if
true.
It's going to, happen.
But also, I do want to underscore this idea that the blessings that you're looking for, they're waiting for your transformed self.
That's my point, right? You can't manifest unless
You're
you get to
changing.
even if, I think when people have children, right? When you bring different souls down, I think consciousness is a part of it, right?
Of course.
There has to be.
You're talking about a conception or as they're growing?
No, all of it,
Yeah.
really. But I do want to add on to Amy Edmondson, because I think this is really great for our listeners in terms of identifying failure. So she has 3 types. The first is basic failure. It usually means you missed or messed up one step. While the failure is basic, the ramifications can be big or small, like mixing up salt and sugar in a recipe or leaving the stove on, like basic mistakes, basic failure. Then there's complex failure, means that there are multiple factors that led to one big failure. Edmondson uses the supply chain breakdown during the pandemic as an example of a complex failure. There are several things happening at once for a perfect storm. But let's focus on the third kind, that's intelligent failures. These are the results of exploring new territory, pursuing a goal. You've done your homework, and the potential failure is as small as possible and can be learned from, right? So you understand that this kind of failure, it's a necessary process. And she encourages us to do more of this kind of failing. So welcome the lessons of failure, like being a scientist. Scientists expect tests to be wrong, right? That's part of it. They see every failure as an important step by knowing what doesn't work or what isn't correct, all part of the process of figuring out what does work. And I think that's invaluable. Like if we can take that approach to everything, then you're really a healthy human being as far as I'm concerned. She lays out the following questions to ask yourself to improve your intelligent failures. What is it I'm really hoping to do? What's the progress I'd really love to make? What do I know currently about how to achieve that goal? And what do I not know?
Sorry, can you say them again?
What is it I'm really hoping to do? What's the progress I'd really love to make? What do I know currently about how to achieve that goal? What do I not know? I think that last question is really powerful because very often we're very busy saying what we do know and proving what we do know. If you're honest with yourself, what do I not know? Then you're the scientist again. This was memorably phrased by former Secretary of State Donald Rumsfeld as known unknowns. We know there are some things we do not know. So what might I try next to see what will happen? And she gives this example of Julia Child. She would often make
Julia?
Yeah, it is Julia. Julia Child would often make mistakes on her show and then she'd laugh, which I love that approach, right? And she'd say, oh, well, that didn't go very well. She'd then explain what went wrong and then she'd fix it. Not only were her mistakes informative, but they were endearing. They made cooking fun, low risk, and removed anxiety for her audience of trying to achieve perfection. Sure, she was in front of a national TV audience, which can feel pretty high risk, but at the end of the day, it was just an omelet.
Right. And what I would add to this, which I think is, again, hopefully resonates with our listeners, that being able to see our mistakes and our failures and actually embracing them is a gift. It's a skill and it's a gift. There's a teaching from the ancient Kabbalists, and they say if a person sees that things aren't going right, that there are things that he or she doesn't want but are coming into that person's life, it says then he should study. He should take the time to invest in spiritual study. And it says, and if he or she continues to not be able to discover, you should study even more. What is the point of that lesson? That most of us, unless you're deeply introspective, and this is something Amy Edmondson talks about as well, the importance of reflecting, but to know that the fact that, and again, any one of our listeners right now would ask, if you stop for a second, what are the top three things you need to change? I'm not asking you to share necessarily, but
I'm super clear.
Yeah.
As I ask myself that daily.
Yeah. So I would ask our listeners, because if the answer is no,
I mean daily, especially if I'm having a day that wasn't how I planned it, but it's an exercise. It's part of my daily experience.
And the point is, and if not, take the time to meditate, to study, because if we're not clear, if we're not seeing, it's not that there isn't what to change, it's just that we're blind to it. And the gift and skill of discovering and seeing what it is that we need to change is a tremendous blessing. It doesn't come without spiritual work. And therefore, if you really understand that, or if you ask yourself the question, what is the one thing, three things that I need to change today, tomorrow in my life? And if you don't have an answer to that question, going back to what we said before, you're not ready for your next blessings. You're not ready to manifest your next blessings. Only if you are constantly, relatively, and by the way, and this isn't about, being negative towards yourself, because you understand this is actually the perfect process for you. So discovering those areas or becoming clear about those areas that you need to change is one of the greatest blessings you can have, because that is actually the road towards transformation. And I would add one more thing. I was having a conversation with somebody last week, and they asked me, they were, every once in a while people are open, tell me what it is that I need to change. And I told him, I was also very clear that he probably doesn't have the perseverance to see that change through. So I have, in the work that we do.
You didn't share that second part with him.
No, I probably should. I will probably next time I see him.
Well, I'm going to make sure you do.
But this is true about so many people. There'll be a moment of clarity. Oh my God, I need to change this. I can't believe I did it. But it doesn't end there. that is just the vision. Then the work begins, and you have to be consistent with it. And, and sometimes, again, we address mistakes or address failures when they're acute, but then we don't awaken the long-term perseverance of work in order to truly transform them. And this is, again, another question I would ask our listeners. What is something that not only that you realized you need to change, but you took the time and the effort day after day and week after week and month after month until you actually saw that change? And it's one of the saddest things. And again, I do have these conversations often with people where, like, tell me something that I need to change, or what is it, or why did this happen? What do I, and it's relatively clear, even clear to them at the time. But more often than not, you realize they're not going to have the desire or perseverance to really make the change, because change only happens over time when you're consistent with your work.
But I think people don't have the desire or perseverance because they don't think it's possible, and they have so much fear around failure. And again, from a childhood, right? Protect yourself at all costs. Being vulnerable is not safe. So I do want to touch upon vulnerability and criticism for a second. So I think that's a big part of why people think that they can't change anything, right? Whoever you were speaking about, I think if you awoken them to, because the fact that they're asking you means they have some kind of desire.
Of course, in
right?
that moment, absolutely.
Right.
It was
and
genuine.
They're probably not aware that they don't, what's blocking them, right? So I don't know if it's that they don't have the why don't they have the perseverance? So I think if you understand the why sometimes, then you can get to the other side of it. Anybody who's put themselves out there, for instance, on social media, and you get comments that are hurtful and criticism, that can make anybody kind of spiral and just stay in bed for a moment. So Brene Brown had a video of hers go viral, and despite both her husband and the therapist telling her to not read the comments, she read the comments. And while most of them were positive, we all know how negativity bias works. It was the negative comments that sent Brene into a spiral of binge watching Downton Abbey for 8 hours straight. So from that experience, Brene shares, life is not about winning or losing. It's about showing up and being seen. I really love this. And if you're going to show up and be seen, there's only one guarantee: you're going to get your butt kicked. She used a different word. I love this quote from Theodore Roosevelt that so perfectly sums up the risk and rewards of trying, failing, and allowing yourself to be vulnerable in the process. It's not the critic who counts, not the man who points out how the strong man stumbles, or where the doer of deeds could have done them better. The credit belongs to the man who is actually in the arena, whose face is marred by dust and sweat and blood, who strives valiantly, who errs, who comes short again and again, because there's no effort without error and shortcoming. But who does actually strive to do the deeds? Who knows great enthusiasms, the great devotions? Who spends himself in a worthy cause? Who at the best knows, in the end, the triumph of high achievement? And who at the worst, if he fails, at least fails while daring greatly, so that his place shall never be with those cold and timid souls who neither know victory nor defeat. I love that.
Beautiful.
So after coming upon this quote, Brene changed her attitude towards criticism. She decided on the spot that if someone who wasn't also in the arena, also getting their butt kicked, then she wasn't interested in their feedback. I could not agree more.
Beautiful. So if you would leave our listeners...
Well, I want to ask you one question.
Sure.
I'm going to ask you two questions.
Two questions.
Can you recall a time when you initially felt like you had failed, but it couldn't have turned out so well in the end without that initial failure? Because you've never ever used that word. I've never actually heard you use that word about yourself, but there must be a time you felt like that.
I made mistakes, of course, but failure to me because my view is that life is a process of growth and development, both what one would call the mistakes, the failures, and the triumphs. So
the failure somehow implies that you didn't achieve, and you're saying,
yeah. And I think, and this is the idea that if you're never giving up, right? If you ask me, have I achieved what I want to achieve in life? Of course not yet, right? Because I hope that, yes, I've achieved certain things, but my goals are endless. So my, that process doesn't end. So any lack of accomplishment so far is just the next goal that I'm going towards. So I'm trying to think. I've had, again, mistakes, certainly, both personally and in work. But I don't really see them as failures or even mistakes. If I've done something, like if I hurt somebody or I did something that I shouldn't have done, of course I want to learn from them. But when I'm trying to achieve something and it doesn't work out, I just see that as part of the process. I mean, I'm just thinking, but there are certain things that I've invested time and effort in, and they didn't work out as I wanted them to. But I really trust the process. So I never view it as a failure.
Mm-hmm.
Sorry.
Yeah, no, don't be sorry.
I hope that we have inspired our listeners both to desire to live a life of change, and we need a stronger word than embrace the mistakes and the failures, because they lead us to the person that we need to be. Like, really embrace them and be safe with yourself to see them and awaken the perseverance to want to truly change those aspects
and stay in the arena, basically.
Exactly. And become the person that you need to be becoming all the time. So this is a perfect time to remind our listeners to send your questions, comments, stories to Monica and Michael at spirituallyhungry.life. Monica and Michael at spirituallyhungry.life. All your questions, all your comments, all your inspirations, all your ideas for topics. We read your emails and we are inspired by them. And when we share them with our listeners, they are inspired by them as well. As always, share this podcast with everybody you know. Go to Apple Podcasts, write 5-star reviews, and share this podcast. And as always, we hope you enjoyed listening to this podcast as much as we enjoyed recording it.
Stay spiritually hungry.